generations within the ANC. What does a generational mix at the top of the ANC even look like? Perhaps we'll unpack that in a couple of minutes from now, as well as we continue our live coverage of the 6th ANC policy conference. As I mentioned earlier, a very, very important policy conference ahead of this year's elective conference coming up in December as well. Why? Because whatever happens at the elective conference in December is going to have a real bearing on how the ANC performs in the elections in a couple of years' time. Well, let's bring in very kindly joining us here at our Nasrec studio this cold Saturday morning, Matlala Setlhalogile, political analyst, joining us to talk about the conference so far. Matlala, good to have you with us. Thanks for coming in. You've been wearing your accreditation. They make us wear these things everywhere. You can't even go to the bathroom without one of those things on. So glad you made it through to us on time. The big thing I think that's come out of yesterday, because so many people were talking about it, was the step aside resolution. Now we've had Gwede Mantashe coming out saying, now is not the time. This is not the policy conference. That's not going to make KZN and Limpopo very happy. What did you make of it?
Look, Gareth, I think the step-aside rule was never going to find expression in this policy conference. Remember that this is not the national conference of the ANC, but rather a national policy. It's not an elective conference where issues such as internal procedures are discussed at length. Here, it's a matter of discussing policies that will contribute to the well-being of South Africa in general. And to be quite fair, the discussion around the step-aside rule is warranted to an extent because the implementation of the rule has been inconsistent thus far. I mean, we can take even the instance of the president currently with the Phala farm gate saga. In my very honest view, he has brought the ANC into disrepute. Yes, we have legal infrastructure in terms of accounting to the courts and everything, explaining himself in those kind of processes. But ultimately, President Ramaphosa is a public representative. He owes South Africans public accountability, and he must subject himself to such. And from his lack of forthcomingness in terms of accounting publicly, my view is that he has indeed placed the ANC into disrepute.
And there's reports as well, Siphamandla Goge managed to get some clarity on this as well, that even within the ANC's Integrity Committee, the president not that forthcoming, arriving, but apparently not even answering the questions put before him as well. So not even publicly, but even within his own ranks, the president getting a bit of flack for that.
Yeah, that goes to show that there's an element of thinking that he's above ANC internal processes. I mean, the structures were set up to account within party structures, something that he has failed to do. Showing up and accounting are two different things. And I think he owes that element of public accountability. He runs the risk of widening the gap of the trust deficit that exists already between the ANC and citizens. And remember that he's not only the president of the ANC, but rather the president of the country. And from that perspective, he also risks widening the gap between South African government and the citizens, something that we have seen in the past few years where there has been a decline of trust in public institutions and political system in general.
Some people on social media, yes, and not an overwhelming amount, but I must be honest, this ANC policy conference hasn't exactly lit up the social media streets, I think is how the kids call it these days. Not exactly lighting it up, but I mean, if you read through what some people are saying, especially on the step-aside resolution, calling the president a hypocrite based on how quickly he acted on Ace Magashule, William Kize, the former health minister as well, and then he himself not holding himself accountable for this. Some people going as far as to say hypocrite. What do you make of that?
Firstly, the issue of the conference not lighting up social media, as you say it, I think the mood is a bit somber. I think there's an element of realization from within the ANC ranks that maybe the party is not a force to be reckoned with as it was a few years ago. The reality of electoral power loss is glaring them in the face currently. And in terms of the inconsistencies, or rather dealing with the likes of William Kize, the likes of Ace Magashule, I don't think it was as quick as people make it out to be. Remember that the elective conference took place in 2017. The step-aside framework was only finalized last year. That's about 3 years. So it was 3 years in the making. He had to ensure that it adheres to procedural fairness and passes the legality tests. But in terms of the application thereof, he seems to be quite inconsistent. As I said earlier, I do believe that the president, with his failure to account publicly, has put the ANC into disrepute.
We need to talk about how the ANC is going to raise the bar, and I use the word bar specifically here as well, because ANC NEC member Senzo Unu yesterday saying it's time for the party to sober up. Have we been dealing with an ANC that's had a hangover for the last 8 years? Is it now time to sober up? It was quite a telling comment to make. Are we being led by those with a bit of a political hangover?
I think when he said it's time for the ANC to sober up, he meant in terms of ideas. The intellectual capacity of the ANC's ability to generate ideas currently is almost non-existent. I think they do actually make an acknowledgement of such, that the ANC is not at the center of generating ideas. And when he says that, I believe, he refers to its ability to think carefully about the future of South Africa and the role that the ANC ought to play, and the kind of ANC that is required to play that specific role.
I'm curious if we just take a look ahead to the program today. Let me just find my program here very quickly, Matlala. Of course, my iPad has now crashed on me, hasn't it? No, it hasn't. It's come back. Thanks for that. Here we go. So day one, a lot of administration to get through as well. And as you mentioned, quite a somber mood. The president not exactly getting the rousing welcome, I think, in the plenary session that I think people were expecting him to get. But today, there's going to be quite a lot that I think people are going to want to hear about. Of the various commissions, it would be, for me personally, there's 8 commissions happening today, all starting at 9 o'clock, by the way, this morning. It's the Economic Transformation Commission that's going to be the most important. Rising fuel costs, the energy sector, the Eskom crisis. I mean, all of these things tie back into the economy as well. What do we need to hear from the ANC that's going to make us believe that actually there is a plan, and this is not just another big talk shop over a weekend?
I think firstly is stabilizing the economy, because we're currently experiencing an economic decline. First stabilize, then secondly resuscitate the economy. But what kind of interventions are they going to make to resuscitate the economy? Because economic transformation cannot happen without economic growth. The transformation of society in terms of economic terms depends on generation of income, generation of jobs, and redistributing that income, and ultimately redistributing the bit of wealth that is created. And that's one aspect of economic transformation. But for that to happen, South Africa requires a number of structural reforms. The network industries are in tatters. You look at the freight and rail, the ports are dysfunctional. You look at our electricity sector, as you indicated, Eskom is in tatters. The water infrastructure. So the network industries need to be prioritized. Firstly, even though Operation Vulandlela within the National Treasury has made some progress, the pace of that progress is quite lackluster. Besides that, we need to look at how to upskill South African youth in general. Remember that since the Gear Asgiza days, one of the challenges in South Africa has been a skills mismatch issue, a lack of skills. We're sitting here almost 20 years later, and those issues are not yet addressed. Even the Department of Education itself, within the skills supply and demand report that came about a year or two ago, they still mention that a skills mismatch is one of the most challenging issues. We're creating graduates, we're producing graduates, but the kind of skills that they acquire are not the kind of skills that are needed in the economy. What have they done to address that? Something that we've picked up over 20 years ago. And lastly, they need to rejig the industrial policy. They need to look at that. Remember that South Africa's central industrial policy focuses on manufacturing as a job-creating sector to create industrial jobs. But there has been a slight structural economic shift in the past few years, where services now, sectors such as services, have produced more jobs than manufacturing, despite the many interventions, by the way, that have been extended to the manufacturing sector. So I think rejigging of the industrial policy and developing a skills plan that aligns with the industrial policy the network industries, and skills development.
Just as I say goodbye to you, last question. I know we're only into day 2. In fact, day 2 hasn't even properly started, only getting underway at 9 o'clock. Is it too early to give a sense if you think this is going to be a successful policy conference? Because we had staff members protesting outside here at Nasrec yesterday. We know now what Gwede Mantashe's standing on the step-aside rule is. We're waiting to see what ANC, KZN and Limpopo does as a reaction to that, because they're not going to keep quiet about that, I'm quite sure as well. Is it too early to say this is going to be a successful policy conference? Because I said this at the top of the show. This conference is going to dictate what happens at elective conference. That elective conference is going to have a very real, tangible effect on elections 2024. And the ANC needs to tread quite carefully what they do here. Those elections, those policies, the way they're going to fight those elections in a couple of years starts this weekend, doesn't it?
I think it's a very tricky question because how we evaluate the success of the policy conference might be different to how the ANC itself evaluates the success of this conference. I think from an ordinary South African perspective, the conference will be a success if tangible, workable policy alternatives and solutions are developed from this particular conference. But from the ANC side, I think they will most probably look at the success from the administrative side of things. It ran smoothly, but without necessarily addressing the substance of the conference itself. So that's why I say it's a bit tricky in terms of whether it's a success or not. What it means to the ANC as a success and maybe to many ordinary South Africans are two different things.
It's two different things, and I think that's exactly what many people are saying. That's why they're going to watch to see how the two align between the ANC and South Africans. How much does it actually align? Matlala, it's so good to have you coming in. Appreciate your time coming all the way to Nasrec for us. Matlala Setlhalogile, a political analyst, joining us here on ANC this